I never thought I'd be posting something like this, but what happened to me 3 months ago still keeps me up at night. I keep replaying it in my head, trying to make sense of it all, but honestly, I can't explain what I went through. My hands are literally shaking as I type this, but I need to get this out there because maybe someone else has experienced something similar. I was driving back home to Nevada from visiting my buddy Jake in Colorado. Nothing fancy, just a regular trip I'd done dozens of times before. My car is this beat-up 2012 Volvo that I bought off Craigslist for $3,000. Not pretty, but it usually gets me where I need to go. The thing is held together with duct tape and prayers, but it's mine, you know. I'd left Jake's place around 2 p.m., planning to get home by midnight if I pushed it. Everything was going fine until I hit the Nevada state line. That's when the weather decided to completely lose its mind. The storm came out of nowhere, and I mean literally nowhere. 1 minute I'm cruising along with clear skies. The next minute it's like someone turned on a fire hose above my car. The rain was coming down so hard I couldn't see more than 5 feet in front of me. But here's the kicker. My windshield wipers had been acting up for weeks, and right when I needed them most, they completely gave out. Just stopped working entirely. I'm talking about rain so heavy, it sounded like gravel hitting my windshield, and I've got zero visibility. I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white, creeping along at maybe 15 mph on what's supposed to be a 75 mph highway. Cars were flying past me through the rain like maniacs, and I knew I was going to cause an accident if I kept going. There was nothing else I could do. I had to pull over and wait it out. I found what looked like a safe spot, about half a mile off the highway. Just some flat desert ground behind a small hill that blocked most of the wind. So there I was, sitting in my car in the middle of absolutely nowhere, watching the storm rage around me. The thunder was so loud it made my ears ring, and the lightning was constant, like a strobe light show that never ended. I tried to stay calm, telling myself this was just bad weather and it would pass. I had about half a tank of gas, my phone had decent battery, and I figured I'd just wait it out for an hour or two max. But that storm had other plans. It kept going, and before I knew it, it was completely dark outside. I'm talking pitch black, the kind of darkness you only get in the desert when there's no city lights for miles. The rain finally started to let up around 10 p.m., but by then I was already on edge. I'd been sitting there for hours with nothing but my own thoughts and the sound of thunder. My phone barely had signal, just one bar that kept coming and going. I kept checking the weather app, but it wouldn't load properly. I was starting to think about trying to drive again, even with the busted wipers, when I saw something that made my blood run cold. At first, I thought it was just more lightning reflecting off something, but then I realized these were different. These were lights, but not natural ones. They were moving in this weird, jerky pattern about a quarter mile away, like someone was waving flashlights around randomly. 3 separate lights, all moving independently, but somehow staying in the same general area. They weren't steady like car headlights, and they were too bright and focused to be phone flashlights. I watched them for maybe 10 minutes, trying to convince myself they were just other stranded drivers, or maybe some kind of maintenance crew. But something about the way they moved didn't feel right. They kept zigzagging back and forth, sometimes disappearing completely for a few seconds, then popping back up in a totally different spot. It was like whoever was holding them couldn't walk in a straight line. I started getting this sick feeling in my stomach, like when you know something's wrong, but you can't put your finger on what it is. Then the lights started moving toward me, and that's when I really began to panic. I'm not ashamed to admit I was scared out of my mind. These lights were getting closer, maybe 200 yards away now, and I could tell they were definitely flashlights being carried by people. But these weren't normal people. I could see their silhouettes occasionally when the lightning flashed, and they were moving all wrong, like they were stumbling around or dancing or something. One of them kept spinning in circles, shining the light up at the sky, then down at the ground, then straight ahead. Another one was walking in these weird zigzag patterns, stopping every few steps to wave the flashlight around wildly. The third one seemed to be the most normal, but even they were moving with this strange, jerky gait that made my skin crawl. I knew I needed to get out of there, but my car was completely visible from where they were coming. If I started the engine, they'd definitely see me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the leftover thunder. I made probably the stupidest decision of my life. I grabbed my phone and quietly opened the car door, thinking I could hide behind some rocks about 30 feet away until they passed. The second I got out of the car, I could hear them. Not talking, but making these weird sounds, like humming or moaning, but not quite either. It was this low, constant noise that seemed to come from all three of them at once. I've never heard anything like it before or since. I crouched down behind this cluster of rocks, trying to make myself as small as possible, and watched as they got closer to my car. The smell hit me then, this weird chemical smell, mixed with something sweet and rotten. I don't know how to describe it, but it made me want to throw up. When they finally reached my car, they started circling it like vultures. The first guy, and I'm pretty sure they were all guys based on their builds, kept shining his flashlight through the windows, pressing his face right up against the glass. The second one was running his hands along the car's body like he was feeling for something. The third one just stood there, swaying back and forth, that humming sound getting louder. I was maybe 30 feet away, but I could see everything clearly when their flashlights lit up the area. They were all wearing dark clothes, maybe hoodies, and they moved like they were drunk or high or both. I was trying so hard to stay quiet that I was barely breathing. My phone was clutched in my hand, and I kept thinking I should call 911, but I was terrified they'd hear me talking. They spent what felt like forever just circling my car, touching it, looking inside it. One of them tried the door handles. Thank God I'd locked the doors out of habit, but then things got really scary. The tallest one, who seemed to be the leader or something, suddenly stopped his weird swaying and let out this loud whistle, not like a normal whistle, but this shrill, piercing sound that made my teeth hurt. The other two immediately stopped what they were doing and looked at him. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out what I'm pretty sure was a gun. I couldn't see it clearly in the dark, but the shape was unmistakable. My whole body went cold. He raised it up in the air and fired a shot straight up into the sky. The sound was deafening, way louder than gunshots in movies. My ears were ringing, and I actually bit my tongue trying not to scream. That's when I knew I was in serious trouble. These weren't just weird drunk people or drug addicts. They were armed and clearly not thinking straight. Right after the gunshot, they all started moving differently, more agitated, more frantic. The one with the gun was gesturing wildly at the others, and they began searching the area around my car more aggressively. One of them started kicking at the dirt, like he was looking for something buried. Another one was shining his flashlight in wider and wider circles, and I realized with horror that he was going to spot me soon. I had no choice. I had to call 911. I dialed as quietly as I could, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. When the operator answered, I whispered as soft as I could manage, "Please help me. I'm stranded off Highway 93 near the Nevada border. There are 3 armed men at my car." The operator asked me to repeat myself, and I had to whisper the whole thing again. She told me to stay on the line, and that help was on the way, but I had to hang up because one of the flashlight beams was getting way too close to my hiding spot. I turned my phone to silent and just prayed the police would find me before these guys did. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my entire life. I stayed crouched behind those rocks, trying not to move a muscle, while these 3 lunatics continued their bizarre ritual around my car. They were getting more and more agitated as time went on. The one with the gun fired another shot into the air, then started yelling something I couldn't understand. It sounded like gibberish or maybe another language, but spoken in this angry, slurred way. The other 2 responded by making those weird humming sounds louder, and they started moving in what looked like some kind of pattern around the car, like they were performing some sort of ceremony or something. I know how crazy that sounds, but I swear that's what it looked like from where I was hiding. My legs were cramping from staying in the same position for so long. and I was getting dizzy from the adrenaline and fear. At one point, one of them walked so close to my hiding spot that I could smell that awful chemical odor again. It was like paint thinner mixed with rotting fruit. I held my breath until he moved away, certain he was going to find me. Then, just when I thought I was going to lose it completely, I saw the most beautiful sight of my life, police lights flashing in the distance on the highway. They were still pretty far away, but those red and blue lights were like a beacon of hope. The three guys saw them too, and their whole demeanor changed instantly. The weird humming stopped, and they all froze for a second, like deer in headlights. Then the one with the gun let out this harsh whistle again, and they all started moving toward the highway, away from my car. But here's the thing that still gives me chills. They didn't run like normal people would. They moved in that same jerky, unnatural way, but faster, like they were gliding or floating across the desert floor. I watched their flashlights bob and weave as they headed toward the road, and within maybe 5 minutes, they were completely gone. Just vanished into the night like they'd never been there at all. I waited until I saw the police car pull up next to my Volvo before I finally came out from behind those rocks. The officer who responded was this middle-aged guy with a thick mustache, and when I stumbled over to him, shaking like a leaf, he took one look at me and said, "Let me guess. 3 guys with flashlights acting weird." I was so shocked I almost fell over. He knew. He actually knew what I was going to tell him before I even said it. When I asked him how he knew, he just shrugged and said, "We get calls about those 3 every few months. Always the same area, always the same description. Usually happens during bad weather." He was so casual about it, like it was just another Tuesday night for him. I tried to get more information out of him. Who were they? Why were they out there? Had anyone ever been hurt? But he just kept saying things like, "Some folks just ain't right in the head, and probably just meth heads from one of the camps up north." But I could tell he was being evasive. There was something in his eyes that told me he knew more than he was letting on. He asked me if I was hurt, if they'd damaged my car, if I needed medical attention. When I told him about the gunshots, he just nodded like it was completely normal. The officer ended up staying with me for another hour while we waited for the storm to completely pass. He called in a tow truck at first, but when the driver said it would be a 4-hour wait, the cop suggested we try to get my car started instead. Amazingly, the engine turned over on the first try, and even though my wipers were still broken, the rain had stopped enough that I could drive slowly. The officer followed me for about 10 miles to make sure I was okay, then wished me a safe trip home. But before he left, he said something that still haunts me. "If you ever have to drive this route again, maybe try to do it during the day. Some things are better left in the dark." The way he said it, with this serious look in his eyes, made me realize that what happened to me wasn't just some random encounter with drug addicts. There was something more to it, something the local police knew about but weren't talking about. I made it home around 3 a.m., but I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I kept thinking about those 3 figures, the way they moved, the sounds they made, and that awful smell. It's been 3 months since that night, and I still can't shake what happened. I've tried to research it online, looking for similar stories or explanations, but I haven't found anything that matches exactly what I experienced. I did find some forums talking about weird encounters on that stretch of highway, but nothing as detailed or specific as what I went through. The closest thing I found was someone mentioning desert walkers who appear during storms, but their post was from 2018 and didn't have much detail. I've thought about contacting that police officer again, maybe trying to get more information out of him, but honestly, I'm not sure I want to know more. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. What bothers me most is how normal everything seemed afterward. I drove home, went to work the next day, told a few friends about getting caught in a storm, but I never mentioned the 3 guys. Every time I tried to bring it up, the words just wouldn't come out. It's like my brain was protecting me from reliving it or something. The only person I told the whole story to was my mom, and she just said I was probably hallucinating from stress and lack of sleep. Maybe she's right, but I know what I saw and heard that night. The strangest part is that I haven't been on a road trip since, not even short ones to visit Jake or my family in other states. Something about being alone on dark highways just fills me with this overwhelming dread. I keep thinking about those police lights appearing just in time, and I wonder what would have happened if they hadn't shown up. Would those three guys have eventually found me behind the rocks? What were they actually doing out there? Why did that officer seem so familiar with them? And most importantly, are they still out there, waiting for the next storm to bring another stranded traveler into their path? I used to love driving long distances. It was my way of clearing my head and thinking through problems. Now I can barely handle driving after dark in my own neighborhood. I've started flying when I need to travel, which is expensive, but it's better than facing that kind of fear again. Sometimes I catch myself checking the weather obsessively before any trip, even just to the grocery store. If there's any chance of storms, I stay home. I know it sounds paranoid, but after what I experienced, I'm not taking any chances. Whatever those three were, human or otherwise, I never want to encounter them again. I've been putting off writing this for almost 6 months now, but I can't get it out of my head. I keep thinking, maybe if I share what happened, it might help me process it, or maybe someone else has been through something similar. I'm a pretty normal guy, 26 years old, work in IT. Nothing crazy about my life, but what happened to me on that desert highway in Nevada has completely changed how I think about road trips and being alone in remote places. I used to love driving long distances, especially at night when the roads are empty and you can just think. Not anymore. I haven't driven more than 2 hours from home since this happened, and I don't think I ever will again. My friends think I'm overreacting, but they weren't there. They didn't see what I saw that night. I was driving back to Vegas from Phoenix, where I'd been visiting my college buddy Marcus for a long weekend. It was supposed to be a simple 4-hour drive, something I'd done plenty of times before. My car is this beat-up 2012 Volvo that's seen better days, but it's reliable enough for short trips. The engine runs fine, but there are definitely some cosmetic issues and minor problems that I've been putting off fixing because money's tight. The weather forecast had mentioned possible storms, but I figured I'd be home before anything hit. I left Marcus's place around 6 p.m., planning to get back to Vegas by 10 or 11 at the latest. The drive started out fine, just the usual desert scenery and not much traffic once I got outside Phoenix. I had my music playing, a coffee in the cup holder, and I was actually in a pretty good mood. Marcus and I had spent the weekend playing video games and catching up, and it felt good to reconnect with an old friend. About an hour into the drive, I started noticing some dark clouds building up in the distance, but they looked like they were off to the west and I was heading north. I didn't think much of it at first. Then, right around the time I crossed into Nevada, the sky just opened up. I'm talking about the kind of rain that comes down so hard you can barely see 10 feet in front of you. The problem was, my windshield wipers had been acting up for weeks. They worked sometimes, but they were slow and left these streaks across the glass that made visibility even worse. I'd been meaning to replace them, but like I said, money was tight and I kept putting it off. Now I was stuck in the middle of nowhere with wipers that were basically useless and rain coming down like a waterfall. I tried to keep driving for maybe another 10 minutes, but it was getting dangerous. I couldn't see the road markers, couldn't tell where the lanes were, and I was terrified I was going to drift into oncoming traffic or off the road entirely. The smart thing to do was pull over and wait it out, even though I really wanted to get home. I found what looked like a safe spot about a quarter-mile off the highway, near some Joshua trees and rock formations. It was far enough from the road that I wouldn't get hit by any passing trucks, but close enough that I could see the highway lights when vehicles went by. I turned off the engine and settled in to wait. The rain was pounding on the roof so hard I couldn't hear myself think, and the lightning was constant, lighting up the desert every few seconds. I figured I'd be there maybe an hour, 2 at most, until the storm passed. I had about half a tank of gas. My phone had decent battery, and I wasn't in any real danger. I texted Marcus to let him know I was stuck in the storm, and I called my roommate to say I'd be late getting home. Then I just sat there in the dark, listening to the rain and watching the lightning show. It was actually kind of peaceful at first, despite the weather. The desert has this weird beauty when it's stormy, and I was getting some pretty spectacular views of the lightning strikes. But after about 3 hours, I was starting to get restless and a little worried. The storm wasn't letting up at all, and I hadn't seen another car on the highway in over an hour. My phone had dropped to about 30% battery, and I was starting to think I might have to spend the whole night out there. I was dozing off when I saw these lights in the distance coming from the direction of the highway. At first I thought it was a tow truck or maybe a highway patrol officer checking on stranded motorists, and I felt this wave of relief. But as the lights got closer, I realized they weren't headlights. They were flashlights, 3 of them, and they were moving in this erratic pattern that didn't make sense. They'd sweep back and forth, then stop, then move in circles, then point straight up at the sky. It was like whoever was holding them was either lost or looking for something specific. I rolled down my window a crack to see if I could hear anything, but the rain was still too loud. The lights kept getting closer, and I started to feel uneasy. Why would 3 people be out walking around in the middle of this storm? And why were they heading straight for my car? I turned off my dome light and slouched down in my seat, hoping maybe they hadn't seen me yet. But they kept coming, and I realized they knew exactly where I was. When they got close enough, I could make out the shapes of 3 people, but I couldn't tell much about them because of the rain and darkness. They were moving weird though, like they were stumbling or having trouble walking straight. At first I thought maybe they were lost hikers who'd gotten caught in the storm, but something about their movements seemed off. They kept stopping and starting, and one of them kept making these jerky motions with their arms that didn't look natural. I was getting really nervous now, so I quietly opened my car door and slipped out into the rain. I figured if these people were dangerous, I didn't want to be trapped inside my car. There were some decent-sized rocks about 20 feet away, and I managed to crouch behind them without making too much noise. The rain was soaking through my clothes immediately, but I was too scared to care. From my hiding spot, I watched the 3 figures approach my car. They started circling it, shining their flashlights through the windows and trying the door handles. One of them was talking, but I couldn't make out what they were saying over the storm. Their movements were definitely not normal. They were swaying and stumbling like they were drunk or on drugs. One guy kept pointing his flashlight at random spots in the desert and laughing, this weird, high-pitched sound that made my skin crawl. Another one was walking in these tight circles around my car, over and over again, like he was stuck in some kind of loop. Then the third one, who seemed to be the leader or something, pulled out what looked like a gun. My heart just about stopped. He pointed it up at the sky and fired one shot, and the sound echoed across the desert, even over the rain. I'd never been so terrified in my life. I was crouched behind these rocks, soaking wet, watching 3 people who were clearly not in their right minds mess with my car while one of them had a gun. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered pretty quickly, and I whispered as quietly as I could about my situation. She asked for my location, and I tried to describe where I was as best I could, somewhere off Highway 95 between Phoenix and Vegas, near some rock formations. She said she'd send someone out, but it might take a while because of the storm. I told her about the gunshot, and she said to stay hidden and keep the line open. The 3 figures kept circling my car for what felt like forever, but was probably only about 15 minutes. They were getting more agitated, and I could hear them talking louder now, though I still couldn't make out the words. One of them kicked my car door, and another one started trying to break the window with his flashlight. I was terrified they were going to trash my car or steal it, but I was even more scared of what they might do if they found me hiding. I need to get this off my chest because it's been eating at me for weeks now, and I honestly don't know what to make of it. My friend Carol and I were driving back from Florida to New Jersey after visiting some college friends down there. We'd been on the road for about 6 hours, and I was getting that brain fog you get when you've been staring at highway for too long. Carol was sleeping in the passenger seat, and I desperately needed to stretch my legs and grab some caffeine before I zonked out at the wheel. We were somewhere in Georgia, I think, when I saw this exit that looked promising. There was a big blue sign that said, "Historic Downtown," with some town name I can't even remember now. And it had those little symbols for gas and food, so I figured it would be perfect. I nudged Carol awake and told her we were making a pit stop. She mumbled something about needing to pee anyway, so I took the exit without thinking twice about it. The off-ramp curved around for what felt like forever, way longer than most exits, and when we finally got to the bottom, I immediately felt like something was wrong, but couldn't put my finger on what. The town looked like it was trying too hard to be quaint, you know? Like someone had watched too many movies about small southern towns and decided to build one from scratch. But they got all the details slightly wrong. The buildings were the right style, sort of, but the colors were off, too bright in some places, too faded in others. There were hanging flower baskets on every streetlight, but half the flowers were dead or dying, and the other half looked fake from a distance. The strangest thing was how empty it felt. Not abandoned exactly, because there were cars parked along the street and lights on in windows, but there was literally no one walking around. No one sitting on the porches, no one going in or out of shops, nothing. It was like everyone had just vanished 5 minutes before we arrived. Carol noticed it too because she sat up straighter and said something like, "This place gives me the creeps." I laughed it off and told her she was just cranky from the nap, but honestly, I was starting to feel the same way. We drove slowly down what I guess was Main Street, looking for a convenience store or gas station, and the whole time I had this feeling like we were being watched, even though I couldn't see anyone anywhere. I spotted a little convenience store with a faded red awning that said "Quick Stop" in peeling letters. The parking lot was empty, except for an old pickup truck that looked like it hadn't moved in years. I pulled in and told Carol I'd be right back, just grabbing some energy drinks and maybe some snacks for the road. The bell above the door made this awful grinding sound when I pushed it open, like it was about to fall off its hinges. Inside, the store was cramped and dimly lit, with those fluorescent lights that buzz and flicker constantly. The shelves were stocked, but everything looked dusty, like it had been sitting there for months. Behind the counter was this guy who immediately caught my attention because he was so tall he had to duck slightly under the hanging cigarette display. He had jet black hair slicked back, really pale skin, and was wearing these old-fashioned suspenders over a white shirt. The weird thing was how he was just standing there, perfectly still, staring straight ahead at nothing. When I approached the counter with my drinks, he turned to look at me, and I swear his movements were too smooth, like he was gliding instead of turning. His eyes were this really light blue, almost grey, and when he smiled at me, it felt forced, like he was remembering how to do it. "Find everything okay?" he asked, and his voice was completely monotone. I paid quickly and got out of there as fast as I could without seeming rude. Carol was waiting in the car, drumming her fingers on the dashboard, and when I got in, she said she'd been watching the store window the whole time and never saw me inside, even though she had a clear view of the counter area. I told her that was impossible because I'd been standing right there in plain sight, but she insisted she only saw the cashier, standing alone behind the register. We got into this little argument about it, but then I noticed something across the street that made me forget all about our disagreement. There was another convenience store, almost identical to the one I'd just left, with the same red awning and the same quick stop sign. I pointed it out to Carol and said maybe they were a local chain or something, but she looked at me like I was crazy. "Mary, that store wasn't there when we pulled in," she said, and I knew she was right because I'd been looking for places to stop and would have definitely noticed two stores right across from each other. But there it was, clear as day, and I could even see someone moving around inside through the windows. Something about the whole situation was bugging me, So I told Carol I wanted to check out the other store too, maybe grab some different snacks. She gave me this look like I was losing my mind, but she came with me anyway. We walked across the street, and I noticed our footsteps echoed way too much for a normal street. The second store was laid out exactly like the first one, down to the placement of the chip racks and the cooler placement. But what really freaked me out was the cashier. It was the same guy. I mean, exactly the same guy. Same height, same black hair, same pale skin, same suspenders. He was even standing in the exact same position, staring straight ahead with that weird blank expression. When we walked in, he turned to look at us with that same too smooth movement and gave us the same forced smile. "Find everything okay?" he asked in the exact same monotone voice. I just stood there staring at him, trying to process what I was seeing. Carol grabbed my arm and whispered, "Is that the same guy from the other store?" I walked up to the counter, my heart pounding, and asked him directly if he had a twin brother working across the street. He tilted his head slightly, like he was confused by the question, and said, "I don't have any brothers, Mom. Never have." The way he said it was so matter-of-fact, but there was something in his eyes that made me think he was lying, or maybe he genuinely didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't buy anything from the second store. We just walked out, and I was practically shaking by the time we got back to the car. Carol was quiet for a minute, then she said, "Mary, I think we should get out of here. This place is seriously messing with my head." I agreed, but I had this compulsive need to go back to the first store, just to see if that cashier was still there. I know it sounds crazy, but I had to know. We drove back across the street, and I went into the first store again, leaving Carol in the car with the engine running. The bell made that same horrible grinding sound, but when I looked behind the counter, there was a completely different person there. This time it was a short, stocky woman with graying blonde hair and a name tag that said Dolores. She was maybe in her 50s, wearing a floral print blouse, and she looked completely normal. When she saw me, she smiled genuinely and asked if I needed help finding anything. I was so shocked I could barely speak. I managed to stammer out something about thinking I'd seen a tall guy with black hair working there just a few minutes ago. But she looked at me like I was talking nonsense. "Honey, I've been working here alone all day," she said, and she seemed so sincere that I almost believed her, except I knew what I'd seen. I got back to the car and told Carol everything, and she just stared at me with this expression I'd never seen before. She looked genuinely scared, not just creeped out anymore. "We need to get gas and get the hell out of here," she said, and I completely agreed. We drove around looking for a gas station, and the town seemed to go on forever, even though it had looked pretty small from the highway. Every street we turned down looked identical to the last one, with the same style houses, the same dead flower baskets, the same eerie emptiness. Finally, we found a gas station at what seemed like the edge of town. It was one of those generic stations with the blue and white sign, and the parking lot was completely empty, not a single car anywhere, which was weird because it was the middle of the afternoon on a weekday. I pulled up to a pump and tried to use my credit card, but the screen kept flashing "See Cashier," no matter what I did. Carol stayed in the car while I went inside to prepay. The store was bigger than the convenience stores, with more aisles and a deli counter in the back, but it was just as empty and quiet. I called out, "Hello?" a few times, but nobody answered. I walked around looking for an employee, checking behind the counter, even calling toward the back office, but the place was completely deserted. The strangest part was that all the lights were on, the coolers were running, and there was even music playing softly over the speakers, like someone had just stepped out for a minute. I was getting really anxious by this point, so I decided to just leave $20 on the counter and pump what I could. I figured it was better than being stuck in this weird town with no gas, but when I walked back outside, I literally stopped dead in my tracks. The parking lot was packed with cars. I'm talking completely full, like a busy Saturday at a mall. There were people everywhere, families with kids, teenagers hanging around, elderly couples walking slowly toward the store. Everyone was just going about their normal business, but here's the thing that made my blood run cold. Every single person was looking at me, not obviously staring, but doing that thing where they pretend to be busy with something else while sneaking glances. A kid who was maybe 8 years old was standing next to a minivan with his mom, and he was just openly staring at me with this serious expression that was way too mature for his age. His mom noticed me looking and quickly turned him around, but not before I caught her giving me the same intense stare. I looked around frantically for Carol in our car, and when I spotted her, she was sitting bolt upright in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. I could see her mouthing, "What the hell?" through the windshield. I practically ran to the car, weaving between all these people who had somehow materialized out of nowhere. When I got in, Carol immediately started talking in this rushed, panicked voice. "Mary, I swear to God, when you went inside, this place was empty. I was sitting here alone for maybe 3 minutes, and then I blinked, and suddenly there were all these cars and people everywhere. I watched them just appear, like they were there the whole time, but I couldn't see them before." I told her I believed her, because I'd seen the same thing, and we both just sat there for a second, trying to process what was happening. The people were still looking at us, but now they were being more obvious about it. A teenage girl was standing about 10 feet away, holding a slushie and just staring directly at us without blinking. An old man, sitting on a bench, was turned completely around in his seat to get a better look. It felt like we were animals in a zoo, and everyone was waiting for us to do something interesting. I started the car without even getting the gas I'd come for, and we drove toward what I hoped was the exit back to the highway. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I checked my rearview mirror and saw that every single person was still watching us, some of them even walking closer to the edge of the parking lot to keep us in sight as long as possible. The drive back to the highway felt like it took forever, and we kept passing the same landmarks over and over again. There was this one house with a bright pink door that I swear we drove past at least 4 times, always on our right side, even though we never turned around or made any circles. Carol was navigating with her phone, but she kept saying the GPS was acting weird, showing us in different locations every few seconds, sometimes not even showing a location at all. When we finally found the on-ramp back to the interstate, I floored it, and we didn't say a word to each other until we'd been driving for at least 10 minutes. That's when Carol looked at her phone and said something that made my stomach drop. "Mary, what time did we stop for gas?" I told her it was around 2:30 in the afternoon, and she showed me her phone screen. It was 4:45. We'd been in that town for over 2 hours, but it felt like maybe 30 minutes at most. I checked my own phone and my car's clock, and they all showed the same time. Neither of us could account for the missing time, and we'd been together the whole time except for those few minutes when I was in the stores. We were both pretty shaken up, but I thought maybe the worst was over now that we were back on the highway. The interstate felt normal again. Regular traffic, normal-looking people in normal-looking cars, billboards for chain restaurants and hotels. We were driving in the right lane, doing maybe 70, when this dark blue Toyota Sienna passed us in the left lane. I wouldn't have paid much attention to it except for the windshield, which had this massive spider web crack right in the center, like someone had thrown a baseball at it. It was so distinctive that I actually pointed it out to Carol, joking about how dangerous it must be to drive with a windshield that damaged. She laughed and said something about how people in the South don't seem to care about car maintenance, which was mean but kind of funny at the time. The minivan disappeared ahead of us, and we went back to talking about the weird town and trying to make sense of what had happened. We were going over every detail, and Carol was getting more and more worked up about the whole thing. She kept saying, "That's not normal, Mary. None of that was normal." I was trying to calm her down when I noticed the same minivan passing us again in the left lane. Same dark blue color, same spiderweb crack in the exact same spot on the windshield. I did a double take and checked my speedometer. We'd been going a steady 70 the whole time, never slowing down or speeding up. "Carol, look at that minivan." I said, and she looked up just as it was pulling ahead of us. Is that the same one from before? She squinted at it and nodded. Yeah, same crack in the windshield, but didn't that one already pass us? I told her it had, maybe 10 minutes earlier, and we both just stared at it as it disappeared into the distance again. We started trying to rationalize it. Maybe there were two identical minivans with identical damage, or maybe the first one had taken an exit and gotten back on the highway ahead of us somehow. But we'd been on a straight stretch of interstate with no exits for miles, and the chances of two vehicles having the exact same distinctive damage seemed pretty much impossible. Carol pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of the highway signs we passed, saying she wanted to document where we were in case something else weird happened. I thought she was being paranoid, but honestly, I was starting to feel like anything was possible at that point. We drove in silence for a while, both of us constantly checking the mirrors and scanning the road ahead for any sign of that minivan. The whole experience was giving me this deep, unsettling feeling that I can't really describe, like the world around us wasn't quite real, or like we'd somehow slipped into a place where the normal rules didn't apply. By the time we got back to New Jersey, we were both exhausted and emotionally drained. We'd driven the rest of the way in mostly silence, both of us jumping every time we saw a dark-colored minivan. When I dropped Carol off at her apartment, she made me promise to call her as soon as I got home, and she made me promise again to call if anything else weird happened. I told her I would, but honestly, I just wanted to forget the whole thing and pretend it never happened. But I can't forget it. It's been 3 weeks now, and I think about that town every single day. I've tried looking it up online, searching for small towns in Georgia with historic downtowns, but I can't find anything that matches what we saw. I've even gone back through our route on Google Maps, trying to find the exit we took, but there's nothing there that looks right. Carol has been obsessing over it too. She calls me almost every day with new theories about what might have happened, and she's started researching things like time anomalies and parallel dimensions, which honestly just makes me more anxious. The worst part is that we both have this lingering feeling that we're being watched even now, even hundreds of miles away from that place. It's like whatever happened there followed us home somehow. What really bothers me is that I can't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to leave that town, like we somehow broke a rule or escaped from something that was meant to keep us there. I know how crazy that sounds, but I can't explain it any other way. The way everyone stared at us, the way time seemed to work differently, the way the same people kept appearing in different places, it all felt like we were stuck in some kind of loop or trap, and we accidentally found our way out. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night convinced that I'm still there, that everything since then has been a dream, and I'm actually still sitting in that gas station parking lot with all those people staring at me. Carol says she has the same nightmare. We've both talked about going back just to see if we can find the place again and prove to ourselves that it was real, but neither of us actually wants to do it. I think we're both afraid of what we might find, or worse, afraid that we might not be able to leave a second time. So I'm posting this here because I need to tell someone about it, and I'm hoping maybe someone else has had a similar experience and can help me make sense of it all.